Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. There's a quote by an unknown author that says, "Our most awkward moments are also our most human ones." Well, on today's episode, we're going to explore the topic of awkwardness, where it comes from, why awkwardness is your secret weapon, mental blocks holding us back, and more. My guest is a workplace performance expert, executive coach, best-selling author, and an award-winning two-time TEDx and keynote speaker. She was named a Success Magazine Woman of Influence and has spoken to global organizations including Google, Johnson & Johnson, and JPMorgan Chase. She's been featured in popular media outlets including Forbes, NBC, The Washington Post, Business Insider, and Fast Company. Her best-selling book, Good Awkward, was named a Kirkus Reviews Best Book of the Year. Please welcome a true princess and the woman who's encouraging us to do it awkward, but do it anyway, Henna Pryor. Henna, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me on. And I feel like people won't know what the princess reference is, so I feel compelled to tell them that I'm technically a princess by lineage, but it means absolutely nothing because my mother's home country, Pakistan, is no longer a monarchy. So good for me, but it gets me 0 brownie points whatsoever.
That's okay, but I still love the moniker, so we're going to use it anyway. All
Leaning
right.
in.
Leaning in, you got it. So I am very excited about our conversation today, and researching you and consuming your content, reading your book has really been not only an eye-opener, but it really has taught me some valuable lessons and provided some great insights and some tools and strategies that I know I can use and that I know our listeners are going to benefit from as well. So let's dive right in. I thought it would be a good starting point first for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
I love questions like that because typically we're so quick to pick ourselves apart that to start with our favorite thing. I am a very strong dot connector, and I've always liked that about myself. So what I mean by that is when it comes to connecting people, that comes very naturally to me. I think I'm a pretty voracious networker, but more than that, I think I've always had a gift for connecting ideas. So if I read something in one place and then I experience something in another, I have this way of synthesizing and drawing lines between two things that seem seemingly unrelated. And from that tends to come a lot of my own inspiration and a lot of my own ideas. And I think in the business world, that's an underrated skill to have, but it's one that I'm quite proud of. So I would say that's my favorite thing.
I love that. So let me ask you something. When you think about connecting ideas or connecting people, in terms of the process for you, is that something that you visualize, that if you're reading something or you meet someone, that you automatically can see where they would be connected with someone else and be able to create something magical, or maybe the ideas come together, you just visualize them first and then start to put the pieces together? How does that work for you?
Yeah, interestingly, I'm going to say a hard no. And there's a reason why. I don't consider myself particularly visual. So I do believe in the power of visualization. I am a strong advocate of the research that comes from athletics and musicians and, all of the benefits that come from slowing down long enough to visualize. That said, I don't think I'm naturally a visual thinker. I'm actually much more kind of a thinker in words or phrases than I am visual.
Okay.
So I think what my brain tends to do is it'll read an idea somewhere, it'll catalog it, and then something about it, I've identified some characteristic in it, and then I see a similar characteristic in something else, and somehow my brain connects the two things. And so I'll tell you, one of my favorite things in the world. This, if they were to say, Henna, what do you nerd out over? I'd tell you chocolate. Lately it's sneakers, but the other one is metaphors. Metaphors and analogies. I think that is such a powerful way to take something over here and connect the dots to something over there. And if I could spend all day coming up with inventive metaphors and analogies and sharing them with all of you, I would. I just think it's the greatest tool that not everyone uses as often as they could.
That's so interesting. So I can't let this go. So I'm going to pull on a couple threads here. First, since you brought up metaphors and analogies, in this moment, what is one of your favorite metaphors that just instantly comes to mind?
Yeah, in the spirit of talking about awkwardness, actually, there's one that I don't think, and it's funny, my brain it's escaped me at this point because editing is such a long process. I don't think this made it into the final book, but I was trying to find a metaphor to explain this idea that there are certain things that are inherently viewed as better or more valuable or more beloved because they are purposely imperfect or raw or haven't had their edges smoothed out. And so, I'll share in the modern era, I used our good old buddy ChatGPT to help me be a brainstorming partner on this. And the first few were what I would call the very obvious low-hanging fruit, right? We had the Monet paintings or the cracked pottery, things that I think we've sort of heard ad nauseum. But then it came up with one that I still smile about. It said artisanal bread. And I thought that is perfect. We pay more money for artisanal bakery bread purely because it is imperfect and jagged and not the same color all the way around. And it's not even a perfect shape, right? But we view it as inherently more valuable because it came out just as it is. And I just thought that was such a beautiful metaphor for embracing the full awkwardness of our human experience.
I love that. And I am definitely one of those who will pay more for artisanal bread. I love it. And it's so interesting you say that because I kind of think that too, when I'm looking at it and I think about how visually pleasing it is and that it is that good combination of imperfect and perfect. And I love the lines of the bread and the cracks. And that's such an interesting analogy. Thank you for sharing that. And then the other thing that you said that I have to ask about just out of curiosity. So you mentioned chocolate, which we talked about before we started recording, but also sneakers?
It's a new thing. My speaking best friend got me into, I've turned into a proper sneakerhead. I didn't care at all what was on my feet, but I am a professional keynote speaker. I'm in airports a lot. And he taught me that a good pair of sneakers, a cool pair of sneakers, will elevate whatever junk I'm wearing on the rest of my body. He said, you can be in sweatpants, leggings, a sweatshirt, but if you have on cool sneaks, people will think you tried. And so I got my first pair and then I got my second pair and now it's becoming a problem. So that's my latest obsession.
I love it. So you're all about the kicks. Okay.
Yes.
Very cool. Awesome. So I would love it if you would share with us a memorable or profound experience from your life and how that experience has shaped your philosophy on life.
Yeah, this one's easy for me. I wouldn't call it a singular experience, more of a series of experiences. So I am South Asian. I identify as Pakistani. My dad was actually born in India, but moved to Pakistan quite young. My mom was born in Pakistan. And culturally, there was an expression that really was a driving force behind how I showed up in the world. So if any of your listeners speak Hindi or Urdu, they'll know this one, but the phrase is, Log kya kenge? And what that translates to is, but what will other people think? What will the community say about this? And that expression was used anytime I was doing something that could have been perceived as not socially the norm, right? I grew up in a Muslim household, so going on a date, log kya kenge? What will other people think? Wearing a shirt that felt slightly more, showed a bit more skin, log kya kenge? Watching a movie that was a bit risque, what will other people think? What will the community say? And so growing up, there was and this is not just my parents, this is, I think, culturally in certain cultures, there was a very strong emphasis on not what makes you feel good, not what brings you joy, not what, is important to you or defining to you, but through the lens of, but what will other people think? That's how we make our decisions. What will other people think? And so, again, no fault to my parents. They're wonderful humans who nurtured a lot in my sister and I. But culturally, I really had a lot of intense messaging around I need to act and pick careers and get my grades in such a way that I answer the question well of what will other people think? What will they have to say? And when it comes to defining my philosophy now, it's really everything. Because when you're consistently and regularly focused on what will other people think, what will other people find socially palatable, everything feels awkward. Everything, because every part of you is trying to fit into what others want to see. And when it even threatens to be slightly not that, the emotion of awkwardness ticks up. And so it's one I've felt my whole life.
That's so interesting. So did a point or stage in your life come where you perhaps stopped listening to that inner voice saying, but what will other people think? And if so, when did it happen? And what was the turning point for you?
Yeah. Yes and no. I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that as humans, we are tribal creatures. We are hardwired for social acceptance. So there will always be a tiny part of me that cares what other people think. And I'm actually okay with that, because I think people who care a little bit about what others think are better at cooperating or are better at collaborating, right? There is a degree to which people who don't care at all, we don't necessarily love them either, right? So it's okay to have a little bit of that. Where the turning point came for me was, there were several, but I think the biggest was my first job out of college was a large Big Four public accounting firm. I stayed there for nearly 3 years. I really hated it, but I stayed because my parents' approval at that time meant everything to me. And I remember there was one Sunday where I had this moment of, leaving would be a risk. And I kept thinking, leaving's going to be a risk. I'm going to let someone down. But then I confronted in that same day, in that same moment, abandoning myself is also a risk. And it took until that day for me to realize that I had to take a risk either way. Because by choosing to stay, I was abandoning myself over and over and over and over. And so I think there just became this very clear path of, it's not please them or stay stagnant. It was please them or actively choose to displease yourself. And I think once I realized that there was actually two choices, of which I was regularly making one, it forced me to put some weight on both of them, and then I couldn't unsee that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting example, and one that I know, first of all, it's very relatable. It lands well with me. It's something that I certainly have had to make decisions similar in nature throughout my career, and I know that those that are watching and listening right now can also relate to that. And I asked you the question about that turning point because I feel you on this particular topic. It's such an interesting one, why we decide to make certain decisions. And so often those decisions are tied to how I'm going to be viewed by someone else, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a coworker, what have you. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have said no to something that at the end of the day, I should have said yes to, but the reason that I said no was pulling me so strongly in a direction that I didn't like myself because I made that decision, because I was doing it for somebody else and not for me. So that's a really interesting one. So thank you for sharing that example. I think it's important for us to use that to get some context around how the rest of our conversation is going to flow here. So speaking of Speaking of things that we grew up with and some of those beliefs or some of those mantras that we kept hearing time and time again, what is something in particular that you believed about yourself early in life that you discovered later wasn't true?
That's an interesting question. What did I believe about myself early in life that I discovered wasn't true? Okay, actually, this is something I've really discovered, I think, only in the last year, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
I believed about myself, and I believed this about myself just for a little background because I watched my mom do this too. I believed that I was emotionally extremely strong. And I viewed that as a badge of honor. Just she's an emotional rock. She's able to handle everything. And I believed deeply that that was a driver to much of my material success. Good grades in school, good job, success at work, promotions. What I now know to be true is that I am deeply sensitive and actually deeply a feeling person. But I had learned to put up walls and armor and intellectualize my feelings as a mechanism of protection and not to get hurt. And so I have been doing a lot of rewriting thanks to the help of executive coaches and therapists and lots of other folks to actually lean into this deeply feeling sensitive side that I long didn't believe I was capable of having. And so that's been a big discovery for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And I'm right there with you. So I've done a lot of deep work, therapy, coaching, etc., for a very similar reason. And like you, and I'm sure there's no doubt some differences here, right? But I'm just speaking generally. I was someone who would take emotions and just push them down, right? I showed very few emotions, came across as very stoic, if you will, and just hard.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I've shared this before, but I remember that before my wife and I were married, we sat down with the Justice of the Peace, who knew me and knew me throughout certain periods of my life, and turned to my soon-to-be wife and said, "You know that everyone calls Jay Stonewall." And I'm just like, oh my gosh. We talk about an awkward moment. We hadn't discussed that before. But it spoke volumes about the way that other people perceived me and the way that I was showing up. And it took years to really come to terms with my own emotions, my own emotional well-being, and overcoming those things. And now I'm in a different place. I'm still a work in progress, but I'm getting there. So
yeah, it's funny. Jay, as you were saying that, it reminded me of maybe another angle on this too. I think, my version wasn't stoic or stone-faced. I'm pretty, animated. My version was optimistic to a fault. Too positive all the time, too fun-loving. And I remember, if we think about more, maybe a second turning point was a conversation with my sister when she was going through some tough stuff. And I was kind of like, it's all going to be okay, right? At the time, we weren't talking about toxic positivity the way we are now and the way it's a little more commonplace today. But I remember her looking at me and saying, "Hen, I just need you to be with me right now. I don't need you to tell me it's going to be okay. I'm experiencing some hard stuff, and I just need you to hold space for that. Stop telling me it's going to be okay. I just need to tell you that this is hard." And in that moment, I realized that optimism in excess is actually not being present with people. And I realized a secondary growth edge, which is a little bit of the catalyst for the book too. Awkwardness is an emotion of discomfort. I realized that I would run away from emotions of discomfort as fast as my brain and body would physically let me. And so staying in them is another continued growth edge for sure.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So this was something that you really discovered, let's say, a year ago. So
Yeah.
where are you today if you were to kind of rate your own progress and development? Where would you say you are today?
Oh, gosh, I will never say anything too high because I think that's an excuse to do less work. So I think, five or six. I think, what I am proud of is my husband laughs. I cry at everything now. So now that I joke with my therapist, now that the faucet has been turned on, I seem to not know how to turn it off, right? Everything is making me cry. But what I am proud of is I'm able to have the moments of awareness in real time of feeling in my body the desire to exit an emotionally uncomfortable situation, being able to have a quick moment of self-talk in that moment to say, Hen, this doesn't feel good. You don't like it. Stay here. Stay present. Stay here. You don't need to solve. You don't need to fix. You don't need to smile. You just need to be here with this person, or you need to be here with your feelings. It's not always easy, but that first step of being able to stop, slow down, stay is, 99% of the battle for people. Yeah. So I feel like that's gone a lot better. Now, I will say, and I think this is true of most humans trying to do their own growth work, when things get particularly turbulent or something is highly stressful, I am still guilty of falling back to my old ways of wanting to seek out the positivity or seek out the joy or, deflect or whatever it is. And I think typically humans, when we are heightened stress, we tend to fall back to some of our own wiring until we keep working on it. So it's not a perfect art yet, but perfect art is overrated anyway. So we go.
On we go. As I mentioned, work in progress. And yes, as long as we are seeing progress and we continue to do the work, that's the most important thing. And, you brought up a really important point here, and it was really around awareness, right? Once we're aware of something, it's when we're not aware of it, when it's a blind spot, that it's difficult unless someone else holds a mirror up and maybe points it out to us. But if we don't discover it ourselves or know about it, right, we don't know what we don't know, right? So we can't make the improvement without the knowledge. So good stuff. So I want to switch to talking about Good Awkward. This is such a fantastic book. I love it. I love your writing style. I watched your TED Talks and doing my due diligence as I was preparing for our conversation today. One of the things that really landed with me as I was reading the book and also doing some research on you was the fact that you seem to write the way that you speak, the way that you show up, right? It's so you bring such great content in a way that is digestible, that's enjoyable to read, where I can actually learn something, but it can be heady, but not over the top, right? Because it seems like what you're really trying to do here is to provide the science, but also provide really good tools and strategies that we can use that can help us to improve and ultimately become our bravest selves. So I really appreciate the work and time and effort that you put into this. And I would love it if you would share with us what the difference is between good awkwardness and bad awkwardness.
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to make that distinction, let's first level set with a working definition. So awkwardness has many definitions depending on the context in which it's used, but when we're talking about ourselves, we can think of it this way. The emotion of awkwardness is something that we feel when the person that we believe ourselves to be, or our true self, is facing a gap with the person we think other people see on display. So another way of saying this is, for a moment, our internal identity doesn't feel like it matches their external reality. And in that in-between space, we feel awkward. For example, I raised my hand in a meeting, I made a suggestion, they laughed, they thought it was the dumbest thing they've ever heard. In that moment, my internal identity, someone who thinks they're smart with good ideas at work, is facing what we feel is a different external reality. They think I'm an idiot. They think that was the stupidest thing. Now I feel awkward. I feel embarrassed, right? I feel cringe, all of these things. when we think about the difference between good awkward and bad awkward, in the context of the book, what we're talking about here is bad awkward is when we experience that emotion, that natural emotion, but then it contaminates the future. Essentially, that experience feels so bad, so lousy, and we hold on to it so deeply that the next time we have a chance to raise our hand in a meeting, we don't, because that feeling was so acute and we spun on it and we ruminate on it, and it made us not take that chance in the future or a similar chance in the future. The experience contaminated the next experience. Good awkward is the understanding that awkward moments are inevitable. They are universal. If you are a neurotypical human being, you will experience awkward moments. The most confident person you know that you think has it all together experiences awkward moments as often as you do. But what they've realized is when they can get good at them, they can improve their comeback rate. They can have strategies for how to navigate that kind of moment. They can not assign so much value to it. When they get good at awkward moments, it enables them to take more risks, to be more innovative, to be more courageous, to be more creative. So the key is not eliminating awkwardness altogether. The key is getting good at awkward.
Very good. So I shared a quote at the beginning of our conversation. Our most awkward moments are also our most human ones. Agree?
Yeah.
Disagree?
Agree. Yeah.
Agree.
One of my quotes at the end of my keynote is awkwardness doesn't undermine your authority. It enhances your humanity. So I love that spin on that same idea.
Beautiful. Okay. So let's talk about then, now that you've given us a good definition of awkwardness and the difference between good and bad awkwardness as to how it applies to the book, where does awkwardness come from? So let's kind of talk about the science side of this, because I think it's important for all of us to understand what happens in adolescence and how that has a impact on our lives, and then what we can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So awkwardness is an emotion of discomfort. No surprise to anyone who's ever felt it. It's not a comfortable feeling. It is also a social emotion, meaning that we don't typically feel it that acutely when we're by ourselves. So if I right now from my home office walk to my kitchen and trip over my own 2 feet, but no one saw me, then yeah, it was annoying, but it wasn't awkward. I didn't feel awkward about it. It tends to be a social emotion. We feel it when others are around. And it's in particular, it's a self-conscious emotion. So self-consciousness is that type of emotion that we feel that kind of, skirts social dynamics. It makes us wonder, what will other people think? And so when we think about where it comes from, it actually is not something we're born with. So you'll notice most young kids that you know don't feel awkward about much. They don't feel self-conscious about much. They don't actually develop that emotion in their brain typically until closer to 8 or 9 years old, according to the Journal of Social Psychology. So that's why a lot of little kids will be swinging their hips and singing at the top of their lungs and, acting foolish, and they don't really care. They don't really care. And then around age 8, age 9, they start to become very acutely aware, and they start to look for their own identity through the lens of, who do other people see? Who do other people see? Do they like what they see? And I'm going to start adjusting my behavior based on this lens of, who do other people see? So it's not something we're born with. It's something that we learn. And depending on our conditioning, depending on the media we consume, that feeling can either grow stronger, or, again, some folks had caregivers who were doesn't matter what other people see, they encouraged a different type of attitude, but it can manifest in different ways. But it is, at its very essence, a self-conscious type of emotion that requires a specific toolkit to navigate, especially if it's something that grips us very heavily.
So that would explain why we see the plethora of videos on social media with little young kids dancing in front of the TV and shaking and couldn't care less about what's going on around them. And I love
they
watching
couldn't care
those
less.
videos, but they couldn't care less. But
Right.
so that age of 8 or 9, so now that we understand what happens in terms of social norms and looking for their own identity, etc., let's talk then about some of the things that we can start to do starting at a young age that can help prevent us from getting stuck, from going into those negative patterns where we start to tell ourselves, I can't do this, or I start to compare or look at what those social norms are. So what are some of the things that we can do?
Yeah, the things we can do about this are there's two buckets to consider. One we talked about at the beginning, which is awareness, and then the second is action, and the action we take is through conditioning. So thinking about awareness first is after you experience an awkward moment, which you will, I want you to just take a moment and take stock of the stories that are going through your head following. Is your story something like, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot. It must only be me who does things like this. Increasingly in the hybrid world we live in, it feels often like it's just me because we don't see other people doing it. We don't get to observe them doing it. So increasingly it's creating this false story of I'm the only dum-dum who says stuff like that. I'm the only idiot who spells things wrong on their presentation or mispronounces someone's name, because we're not getting as many opportunities to see others in those moments. So awareness of that, awareness of the stories we tell as far as the impact on the future. So I mentioned a contamination story. Are you telling yourself a story like, gosh, I can't believe I said that dumb thing in the meeting. I'm not going to speak up in the next meeting? Or are you telling yourself a redemptive story, which is, that didn't go quite the way I hoped, but I also know that I don't normally raise my hand in a meeting like that. And I'm proud of myself that I did it. So let me give myself, a couple stars on my notebook for that. That will keep you more in a different headspace the next time such a situation occurs. But we have to slow our thinking down long enough to identify what type of stories do we tell ourselves about these moments. Part two of this, just to quickly touch on, and then we can expand on either of these, is conditioning. We are living in a society today where we are facing a dangerous weakening of our social muscles. A dangerous weakening of our social muscles. This actually started well before the pandemic because of technologies. And, frankly, the data over the years is as people become more successful, they start to move away from cities. They start to move into the home with the bigger yard where their neighbors live further away. It is increasingly less and less required to be in public spaces with other people. Add to that now, if you work remotely, you get to Slack your teammates, Microsoft Teams chat. If you're dating, you're swiping left, swiping right, whatever way you're swiping, right? Increasingly, we've just got this lack of need to have social interaction with each other. And what we're seeing, and the data supports this, is an atrophy of our social muscles. So what do we do about that? What we do about that is we actually have to condition these muscles. We have to exercise them the same way we would physical muscles in the gym. We need to create micro moments of social muscle exercise. We need to increase our social fitness.
Okay, so let's then explore that. So what are some of the things that we can do to create those micro moments, if you will? And I completely understand where you're coming from. I think we can all see that happening, right? And so what is the next step then? What do we do about that?
Yeah. So let's get real tactical with this. So the first thing is take a scan of your environment. How often do you have to interact with folks, right? So if you're somebody who works remotely 5 days a week and rarely has to pick up the phone to talk to someone, the majority of your work is done online or through chat, then you're going to have a different level of intention versus if you are in a job that does require, you work in a plant or you work in a manufacturing facility, then you're actually potentially having to interact with folks. So this is going to be unique for everyone. But in general, I'm going to start real rudimentary here. When we talk about social repetitions, I'm talking about things that used to be so everyday that we've gotten away from. So for example, the next time you're in the grocery store checkout line, I want you to leave your phone in your pocket or in your bag. Okay. Just leave it in there. catch eyes with someone. How are you today? Right? Simple. Here's the rub, though. Here's the rub. I don't care whether they say hello back. This is not about the outcome. This is not about whether it was successful. This is about understanding that you are putting in a social repetition, because by very virtue of you being able to look somebody in the eye and say, hey, how are you today? Guess what? What you're conditioning for is when you need to look your boss in the eye and say, I would like to negotiate for 5% more in my salary increase. You can't look the person in the grocery store in the eye. You are not going to be able to look confidently at your boss in the eye because you haven't lifted that weight in years, right? So these are ways to put small social repetition back into our day. Headphones are another culprit of this. And I hate to make everything technology. We can numb in a number of ways, but headphones, in the coffee shop, in the subway, when we have them in all the time, nobody's going to strike up a conversation with you, nor you with them, because they don't want to bother you. They don't want to disrupt. And then we wonder, how are we in a loneliness epidemic? Even when we are around people, being around people doesn't fix the loneliness epidemic. Talking to them does. Connecting with them does. And so we need to get out of this mental narrative of, I don't want to bother people. Humans are not bothering other humans. We weren't wired like that. We were wired to be in community. So, mileage may vary. If you live in New York City and you're like, hey guy, how are you? You might get a different reaction than in the Midwest. So
Sure.
I want to be realistic, but what I'm asking is start small, but start, because this lack of willingness to reach out to another human in micro moments of connection has big downline cost. When we don't actually talk, we don't experience potential in the moment conflict. We don't experience in the moment difference of opinion. And when we don't ever get to experience that in the moment, when it's only asynchronous over chat or over email, then when it inevitably happens in a meeting or in a conversation or over family dinner, we are that much less prepared to handle it. So we need to keep these muscles at some baseline level of strength.
Yeah, this is truly fascinating. And I look at the way that I show up today. I am with people, in front of people on a fairly regular basis. Yeah. But when I'm at the grocery store, I am heads down with my phone, waiting in the line at the cash register, right? I'm not engaging with people. Same thing at the gym, right? I've got the headphones on. I'm focused on what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm trying not to catch anyone's eye, because not only am I trying to protect my time and protect my peace, but there are times when I just don't want to engage with anyone. But I understand where you're coming from, and I think these are two.
It doesn't have to be the whole time. Not
sure.
Yeah, just 5 minutes. 5 minutes of your gym, not the whole thing.
Exactly. But what I love is starting small, right? Looking for some action that we can all take, and then building incrementally. It's going back to the gym, right? It's like building the muscle, right? We don't transform overnight. It takes regular discipline and attention and just continuing to do the work. So what would be a couple other examples, maybe some other small things that our listeners can do?
Yeah, those are things we can do to generally strengthen the muscle. Now, when it comes to navigating an awkward moment in the moment, when it actually arises, there's a couple of things we can do. I really encourage people to practice talk tracks ahead of time. There's a really fascinating counterintuitive truth about awkwardness. The avoidance of awkwardness increases the awkwardness. Yeah. So you find yourself in an awkward moment and everyone's kind of looking around going, who's going to say something? Now it's getting more awkward, right? The tension is thick. Ironically, being able to name it quickly makes you appear more confident. So think about when you've had an awkward situation around the dinner table or something, and someone, kind of shakes their shoulders and laughs and go, oh, that was awkward, right? Uncle so-and-so, that was awkward. And all of a sudden the entire table's shoulders relax and it's taken the tension out of the room. Naming it can be a really powerful strategy, but sometimes takes practice, right? So practicing learning how to verbalize it is actually something that makes people look very confident. Humor is another tool. So chapters 8 and 9 in the book are all about this. Humor, some of the tools of improvisation. These are great ways to become comfortable with awkward situations. There are some rules to humor, which we don't have time to get into in their entirety, but you don't want to kick down. You don't want to make fun of people, but sometimes it's appropriate to have a laugh at the situation. One of my favorite examples in the book is a friend of mine, Bob Russo, was a longtime executive at IBM. His boss said something in a meeting that really didn't land. Kind of everybody was like, "Ugh, thud," right? Very awkward moment. And his boss immediately could feel the tension. And he said, "Well, that just went over like a fart in church." And he said the entire team was in stitches. But here's what that created. That moment of humor actually had a couple of impacts. One, it lightened the mood, right? It got rid of some of the awkward tension that was in the air. But second, the second thing that it did was it actually created psychological safety. What he said to the team in that moment, in those few words, were, you don't have to always land this thing correctly. You don't always have to say something that's a 10 out of 10. I just completely stuck my foot in my mouth, but I'm letting you know that it's okay. And he said the rest of that meeting was fantastic. People were a lot more kind of bold and open with some of the ideas that they were suggesting because the boss, by virtue of doing that, made it okay. So, really you have to feel out the room. There are some rules that depends on where you are in the company, how new you are, but there's a lot of power to using humor, and improvisational skills are a sort of extension of humor that there's some exercises that people can do that can really help with this.
I love it. So give us an example of one of those awkward moments from your personal life where where you did label it, right? Where you used your own strategies that you write about and what the outcome was.
Yes, I actually have a story that didn't make it into the book, but I still think about it and laugh. So, I'm a first-time author. So I was invited to the U.S. Book Show, which is one of the largest shows for publishing houses, literary agents, and authors in the United States. It's in New York once a year. And my publisher invited me to go, sent me. And I was watching one of the sessions and sat next to this man, struck up conversation. Turns out he is the head of Blackstone Publishing, which is a very prestigious, well-known nonfiction publishing house. And you know what? This is embarrassing because I don't even remember what it was called. But he asked me something like, "Is your book hosted on PubHub?" or something like that. I don't even remember what the name of this thing is. Is it hosted on blank?
Okay.
And in my mind, here's what was happening. What the hell did he just say? I don't even know what that word means. What is it? What is it? What? So in that moment, I was kind of flushed because I'm thinking newbie author, the person I believe myself to be, smart girl who has written a book, is facing this external reality of this girl doesn't know what the hell she's talking about, right? So I called on as I named it, and I used humor. I immediately said, "Well, sir, this is a bit awkward because we're at the U.S. Book Show, and I should probably know this, but I have no idea what you just said." Right? Like I laughed, I looked him in the eye, and I said, "If that's a phrase I'm supposed to know, you get to be the one to teach it to me. I don't know what you just said." I laughed, he laughed. He was like, "I probably should have asked you first if if you've done any of this stuff before." And it was a bonding moment. We bonded over it. He didn't think less of me. The fact that I was able to own it really came across as confidence. And so it's really that willingness to step into that strategy. And it takes practice, to be clear. It takes practice, but now I can get there quite quickly. And not only did it not hurt me, truly, it created a moment of levity. Laughter creates serotonin, it creates social bonds, and we really enjoyed the conversation after. So in real time, I use this stuff every day in real time.
I love that. That's a great story. So today, when you do have those awkward moments afterwards, right after you've worked through it, maybe you've laughed and there's the levity, etc., are you able to let it go, or do you revisit it again either that evening or at some point? Does it still kind of swirl at all, or are you able to just completely let that go?
Rarely does it swirl. I don't want to say that it's every time, that there's no absolutes. Again, I am human. I think the only time it threatens to swirl is if couple scenarios. If it's someone whose approval I really, really, really want, really I'm attached to their approval, then I might swirl a bit. Or if it's something that really, really threatens my identity. So here's an example of what I mean by that. If I say something that comes across as let's just, I hope I haven't done this in a long time, but let's say something comes across as racially insensitive and it creates an awkward moment. That might be something I'd spin on for longer because I work really hard. A lot of my identity is attached to not being that type of person. And so when my internal identity feels that much at mismatch with what they experienced as the external reality, that gap between my two selves feels that much bigger. And I think I struggle a bit to come back to a neutral place in those circumstances. But for the most part, I think using my own strategies and tools, it's rare that even in a slightly acute awkward situation will hook me. I'll still feel it. I'm human. I'll still feel it. But it's rare that I'll ruminate, and it's rare that it'll hook me or stop me the next time.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I had mentioned to you before we started recording about, the couple awkward moments that I've had, one in which happens to deal with podcasting, right? So I had a great guest just like you on, and we started the conversation. We were having a fantastic conversation, and about 10 minutes into the conversation, I realized we weren't recording. So what did that do? First of all, it was very awkward, right? So I did use humor, and that helped to move us through the situation. I owned it. And then what did I do with it? We started recording. We finished the conversation, had a great conversation. But it enabled me to start to look at my processes on how I prepare and execute on podcasting, right? So that became part of a flight checklist. And as small as that seems, or as maybe as insignificant as it seems, it's a big thing, right? So I turned a situation that could have been a really negative situation into something that helped me, and that ultimately was a positive thing that came out of it. So I love that. So the Good Awkward is available everywhere. Obviously, we're going to put a link to this in the show notes. I'm curious, since you mentioned that you're a first-time author, was writing the book itself what you had expected, the process of writing? Was it something that you enjoyed? And what did you learn about yourself as you were writing the book?
Gosh, any author will tell you learn everything about yourself in the process of writing a book. But here's my answer. I love writing. I hate editing. I love writing. I hate editing. Creative writing is fun for me. I used to have a blog. I like putting, content on LinkedIn. It's funny. People are like, who does your LinkedIn? I'm like, I do. I really enjoy the process of writing. But writing a book, they should call it what it is. It's not writing a book. You are writing, restructuring, outlining, editing a book. There's a lot more to a book than actually just the writing part. And so, the editing part where you have to get so surgical. My original manuscript was something like 70,000 words. The final book is, I think, less than 30,000. I wanted it to be a short read. That's a lot of cutting room floor. A whole lot. And it broke my heart every time the editor was like, this is great, but it's got to go. Love this story. It's got to go. And I'm like, I just want to cry.
I'm personally attached to this.
I know. But the final book is so much better and richer. And it's not one. My dad gave me this compliment, which I appreciated. He said, Henna, you don't stretch anything longer than it needs to go. You don't say anything twice when it doesn't need to be said. And I said, Dad, yes, I did. And yes, I do. But I had a wonderful editor who made sure that she caught those things. So bless the editors who don't get enough credit for helping take, people who have a lot of ideas and could write for days and days and actually helping it be organized. And, for me, the book, I wanted it to be not just for the regular reader, but we agreed, my editor and I, she said, let's write a book for the lazy reader. People's attention spans are short anymore. If you want a book that people will read every word cover to cover, that they'll keep going, the arguments have to flow, that has to be concise, it has to be clear, and it has to be in your voice because people really like your voice. And I just feel really proud that we got there. But writing is fun, editing is hard.
Well, you nailed it. That is for
Thank
sure. You did such a great job on this one. So, with what you've accomplished up to this point in your career, published author, great executive coach, all the work that you do, the speaking work, etc., what are you doing today to push yourself to grow personally and professionally? What are some things that you are specifically working on?
Oh gosh, there's one that's very clearly at the top. And that my word of the year this year, one of them is intention, but I'll be very specific about what that means.
Okay.
I'm proud and with humility, as much as you can hear in my voice, with humility, it's been a pretty meteoric 2 years. I think anybody who's followed me on LinkedIn or knows me can see that it's been fast and amazing. And I am so, so grateful. And I don't attribute any of that to pure luck. I've worked very hard. I've hired the right people. I've made huge investments. So grateful, 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 grateful. And when something happens at that speed, you become very reactive to your own life. You say yes to things because you feel like you need to strike while the iron is hot. You do all the podcast interviews. You do all the press. You say yes to all the speaking gigs. You do all the things. And I am so deeply glad that those opportunities were available to me. I am so grateful for them. I wouldn't have done any of it differently. And yet, this year, I would like to be more intentional about how I spend my time. I want to make sure that I shake off whatever remaining lingering doubts I have about this is a bubble, that this will burst, and actually start to have enough self-trust to say this is not a bubble, Henna. You work hard, you constantly learn, you read all day, you adapt. This is the journey. Now you choose. Be deliberate about the projects you say yes to. Be deliberate about your family coming first. And so that is, as cliche as it sounds, that is my professional and personal growth edge for this year.
Outstanding. So it sounds like you are going to tighten up boundaries and be very cognizant around the things that you say yes and no to, right?
Yeah.
Being able to use our time to support the things that are priorities. And I love the fact that you said family, of course, is right at the top of that list. That's fantastic. So what are one or two bigger questions that you're contemplating and asking yourself today beyond what you just shared, but big questions?
Yeah, I mean, this probably won't surprise you because I've seeded this a couple times, but I am wildly fascinated at what I'm going to refer to as the field of social fitness as it relates to the workplace. And so I'm really doubling down my energy and effort and research on this concept, which was actually popularized last year by the big Harvard study that came about, the number one predictor of happiness is relationships, quality relationships. And they actually used this term, social fitness. Social fitness is the health of our relationships. But I realized that very few speakers, authors, or workplace-focused experts have really explored social fitness in the workplace. So awkwardness is just one facet of what I think is the broader conversation of social fitness. So I'm, in these moments, just wildly excited about learning more about what are the other cogs in that machine that are creating some of these issues. What are some of the things we can do about it? What are some of the psychologies, behavioral science, as it relates to either the strengthening of our social fitness or the weakening or the decline of it? I just can't wait to see what else is out there to learn.
Oh, that is so exciting and fascinating. And I can't wait to see the research that you pull together. And I would fully expect that will be compiled in another book at some point. So we look forward to that as well. So I want to, before I ask my final question to you, I would love it if you would give our audience and me a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do right now?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a repeat from before, but I feel like if I don't say it again, people won't remember. I want to challenge you to look a stranger in the eye this week and say hello or smile. And I want you to just be really mindful of it. If you have a narrative in your head about I'm being a creep or I'm bothering this person or this is not what they want. I want you to just make a commitment. I don't need you to do it to 10 people. I want you to do it to one person, or if you're willing to try a couple people, and just see what comes of it. See what comes of it. Hello, how are you? I like your shoes. I eat that brand of popcorn too. I don't care what it is, but just one. It can be so simple, but that is my challenge. That is my challenge to every single person in your community.
Fantastic. So you heard it, and I am going to take Henna up on that challenge myself. So cell phone, stay in the pocket, stay in the car when I go to the grocery store, which I will be doing at some point today. So I'll make sure to look someone in the eye and have that conversation. Thank you for that challenge. And so really here's my final question to you. What is one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person you've become? One of the most difficult decisions.
I think it's going to have to be something related to the acceptance that achievement is not who I am. And so making any decision I make where Henna as an achiever is threatened, all of those decisions feel really difficult. So taking the road less where there's less income potential or less opportunity for spotlight. I've taken several of those where, I had an opportunity to take a huge speaking gig somewhere and I opted not to for something that just felt more personally meaningful. I feel like for some people they'd go, yeah, no brainer, you do the meaningful one. But for someone who's grown up in achievement orientation, those are still tough for me. And so those are I think some of my toughest decisions, but frankly, the ones that I need to learn to keep making. So still in it. I'm still bumpy bread. It's not perfect, but we're getting there.
You're just like a great loaf of artisan bread. That's so
Exactly.
good.
Exactly.
So, and I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for sharing of your humor, your insights, your knowledge, your experiences, and just being real and raw. I'm grateful for you, and thank you so much.
No, this was a blast. Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for joining us today. And I do have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? Share something that you took away from this particular episode. That helps us out in expanding our reach and attracting amazing guests just like Henna. And to listen to more podcasts, guess what? All you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning and growing. Make sure you run to pick up a copy of Good Awkward and apply the lessons you learn, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.